I guess I start dating in the early 50s, probably when I'm the middle teenager, maybe 16 or 17. Dating was extremely repressed activity in those days. I mean, the sexual revolution did not get uptown on the D train until after I left the Bronx. And I don't know what went on after that, but I can tell you that in those days it was immensely difficult to have anything even resembling sexual activity. Everyone was repressed, including me, and there were extremely elaborate dating rituals. And you needed to go out with a girl a certain number of times before you could attempt to touch her in certain manners, and it needed a certain number of dates, and it was just colossally stupid as I think back on those years. I think I made an innumerable number of blind dates that never led to a second date. The blind date was the way in which you met people. I know someone who knows someone, and I went out on a preposterous number of blind dates in those years. They never led anywhere. The biggest bragging had to do with the Loew's Paradise Theater, and that was when you would hear one of the older guys in the neighborhood or one of the better ball players, and they would always say this: went to the Paradise, went to the balcony, picked up a girl, started the neck, felt her up. This seemed like an impossible story for me when I was a teenager, how you would even do that. And that was the standard thing that guys would say, these older guys. And it was just, it was impossible for me to conceive how you would do that. And I believed these guys. I never got near anything like that. Later, as we got older, and you wanted to show a girl that you were like a smart guy, not just a run-of-the-mill guy, you took them to the Ascot Theater because the Ascot was showing art movies and foreign films. So that showed you were an intellectual. So if you had a girl you thought was a little more intelligent and might value you being a little more intelligent, you took her on a date to the Ascot Theater. There was no restaurant scene as you would think of restaurants today in the Bronx of the 40s and the 50s, although there were a lot of places you could eat. So I make the distinction between a place you can eat and a restaurant. There were a lot of candy stores that served food, mostly sandwiches, and luncheonettes that served food, and a lot of delis, a lot of basically Jewish delicatessens scattered through all of the neighborhoods and through mine. You seldom ate there. You would grab a hot dog and eat it on the sidewalk standing outside. Occasionally someone might actually sit down in a deli and eat in a deli. And there were a scattering of Italian restaurants here and there. But the most important was the first pizzeria that opened in our neighborhood. It was called the Paradise Pizzeria. And that was not a slice joint. That was a serious sit-down place with a jukebox. And that's where you went on your dates after going to the Paradise Theater or the Ascot Theater or one of the other theaters, especially if you were a girl you wanted to be seen with. The Paradise Pizza was our stork club. It was the fancy pizzeria we went to. And then, of course, every neighborhood had its Chinese restaurants. I don't know where the idea of going out for Chinese food on a Sunday night ever came up, but that was the big night to go to Chinese restaurants. The interesting thing about the Chinese restaurants is, by today's standards, they were all pretty much the same. It was as though there was a giant kitchen somewhere that all the food came from and went to each restaurant wherever you went, whatever neighborhood you were in, whatever the name of the place. The chicken chow mein was exactly the same. The egg drop soup was exactly the same. It was the same gelatinous kind of substance to the food. The #1 combination was exactly the same. It didn't matter. Was it any good? I have no idea, because I wouldn't have had the taste. What you were doing was eating Chinese. That was the idea. And as the years evolved and I began to date a little bit and would go out with girls from other parts of the Bronx and perhaps other neighborhoods that had their Chinese restaurants, the food was still the same. Another thing about the dating scene was Krum's, Addie Vallins, Jahn's. These were places that you would go on a date. And here's the interesting thing, too, about Krum's. Krum's was the fancy parlor. It advertised a lot of mixed candies. I remember eating the chocolate-covered orange peel. I would get a bag of it, and I would eat it right to the point of nausea. That told me that I had actually eaten the proper amount when I was about to throw up. But they had uniformed personnel serving you your drinks. And interestingly, it was all at a counter, not tables. And it was not déclassé to sit at a counter with your date at Krum's, because it was a step up. It was a fancy place by neighborhood standards. And not even déclassé to stand behind someone sitting, waiting for them to get up so you could get a seat. But that was a big thing. Addie Vallins was a little further from me, so I would only go over there if I happened to be near Yankee Stadium, because they were located on 161st Street. Jahn's, I don't think I ever set foot in. It came in with a gay 90s look to it, and it had it was basically known, I think, in Westchester or Long Island, some other place. It was not Bronx born. And they had all kinds of fancy kitchen sink where you'd get an enormous amount of sundaes and more than one person would eat it. I'm doing this by recall of conversations. I'm here to admit that I don't think I ever set foot in Jahn's in my life. So I'm living on a Field Place between 183rd Street and 184th Street. That's only a 2-minute walk from the hub of the Grand Concourse and Fordham Road, where Alexander's, which was the anchor of that area, was located. Alexander's gave the impression of being a high-style fashion place, was basically a discount store, perfect for the working class, but done up in good trappings. And then there were a lot of other stores around there where you began to shop for your clothing. There was Simon Ackerman, which is where men got their stuff, and then also stationery stores, bookstores. The step up from what you would find on a normal neighborhood in terms of stores and the type of retail stores existed where I grew up, because basically I was living right near the hub of the more elaborate commercial enterprises. Gorman's hot dog stand being an exception. We would go there because they had very good hot dogs. But by and large, the retail stores, some of them were parts of chains. Where I lived were a little different. Each subway stop had a defined street where you would find a bakery, a candy store, an appetizing store. All of those things were a fruit store, would be located on each subway stop area. But where I lived, the Grand Concourse and Fordham Road, that was my neighborhood, and that was much more a commercial district than most kids growing up. We who lived around there really had access to a much more commercial area and many more movie theaters, because all of the movie theaters in the Grand Concourse Fordham Road area were our neighborhood theaters. Other people might have had just one theater near them. We had about 6 or 7. All of a sudden, television comes into the neighborhood, and the way it first arrives is radio repair stores make a transition and become television stores. And they're little stores just like a hardware store or a little candy store. I mean, small stores, and they put a television set in the window and let it play at night. And that's the advertising for television. And people accumulate and watch without the sound as they're watching through windows. People used to gather around and watch prize fights. Boxing was very big then, and there were a lot of big fights in Yankee Stadium as well, and they were televised. These are the years of Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson and Jake LaMotta. Rocky Graziano. Those were the fighters, the famous fighters of the time. And they would have Friday night fights. And you would stand outside a window of a television repair store where they're also selling television sets and watch it. And then it happened like wildfire. Everybody has a television set very quickly. And everybody's jockeying for position on the roofs to put their antennas up. And we're all watching television. Notably, if you did not have one, but you had a relative who did, you would go over and watch a program at the relative's house, and that was an evening out. Famously, my mother went with me and my sister and my then brother-in-law. He had a relative who had a television set, and we went over to watch Your Show of Shows, or Ed Sullivan, one of those early programs. And the lady, the cousin of my brother-in-law, wore a formal black dress because people were coming as guests. And my mother wore a formal black dress, and both ladies showed up with the same dress. Now, the point is not that they were embarrassed to be seen in the same dress, but for the women, going to watch television at someone's apartment or entertaining people who were coming was considered dress up.